It is forbidden for a Jedi to form attachments, and marriage is strictly against the Jedi code. The reason for this is a Jedi must remain centered always. If a Jedi forms an attachment and lets it rule them, it can lead down the path to the dark side of the Force, causing the Jedi to do things they normally wouldn't, out of fear of losing the ones that they love. Jedi are encouraged to love. However, they are not encouraged to love beyond the point of reason, and beyond the point of duty. If they do so, they risk falling to the dark side of the Force, and risk the fate of their role as a Jedi, something that we saw fully on display in Revenge of the Sith with Anakin Skywalker. It is believed that it was impossible for clones to have children. Although love for the clones was not something that was forbidden, it was definitely not something that was encouraged. Clone troopers were soldiers, and in a sense, they were property to the Grand Army of the Republic. Their free will was negligible. Therefore, if a child were ever going to be born of a clone, it would have huge consequences, and a child born out of a Jedi would be strictly forbidden. This does not mean that this never occurred though. As in Star Wars Legends, there is a tale of a child born of a Jedi and a clone, and today we will discuss that tragic tale. Etain was a human Jedi Knight and General who lived during the Clone Wars. She was the Padawan of Master Cast Fuller, and they together were assigned to Kuila sometime after the First Battle of Geonosis. Their mission was to collect vital information about the Trade Federation, the new enemy of the Republic that were revealing themselves as the enemy of the Clone Wars. It was during this assignment that she would first encounter the clone troopers and commandos of Omega Squad, with whom she would later become increasingly involved. Originally, the young Padawan had only viewed the clone troopers as a tool, and hadn't given them much thought at all, but it was once she met the elite troopers of Omega Squad that this point of view began to change drastically. Etain grew a deep and strong connection with each of the clones, perceiving them not as clones but as individuals that had their own rights and emotion. Etain believed that the clones should maintain just as many rights as the Jedi that they fought beside, viewing them essentially as one and the same, and their lives as one and the same, a sentiment that would concern other Jedi that came into contact with Etain, believing that her attachment with the clones was potentially too strong and too volatile. Etain, though, little cared, growing a particular attachment to one clone commando named Darman, falling in love with the commando. When Etain first sensed Darman in the Force, she sensed someone around her own age, which was strange as at the time Darman was much older. She sensed someone with true emotion and feeling, someone capable of love, and together they resolved to break their vows and the Jedi code, falling deeply in love with one another, even though the rules of the Jedi and the clones would have never allowed this relationship. The two, of course, would eventually be separated due to the ongoing war, called to different missions across the stars. Etain would eventually become a Jedi Knight, and Darman would be assigned to several different clone commando squads. Eventually, Etain would discover that she was pregnant, only sharing this information with one individual, as she believed that if the Jedi were ever to discover this, that they had the capability to kill Darman, exile her from the Jedi Order that she served and loved, and even could take the child for their own. This was a risk that Etain was not willing to stand for. Instead, she reached out to one individual, a Mandalorian who had trained Darman on the planet of Kamino when he was still a young boy. The Mandalorian promised Etain that he would care for her child if the two of them were ever to be found out, and prompted her not to inform the Jedi nor the Kaminoans that they had in fact had a child. He also told her to keep the child a secret from Darman, as this could prompt the clone to do something drastic. Near the end of the Clone Wars, both Darman and Etain were assigned to the world of Coruscant together yet again. It was here that Etain felt implored to leave the Jedi Order, as she believed her beliefs did not fall in line with their philosophies, and feared for the fate of her new son. It was here on Coruscant that Darman was also told that they had in fact had a son together, and that the son's name was Cad. Although Darman was infuriated at first that he was the last to know that he had a child, the three of them spent several happy days together. Eventually though, Darman would be called away from the planet yet again, leaving his son and Etain alone. Once Darman reached hyperspace, however, he sent a comlink to Etain, asking her to marry him according to Mandalorian culture, which Etain ultimately agreed to. The two of them were then married, even though they were worlds apart. Etain would then give her son Cad to the Mandalorian trainer, asking him to keep him safe as the Clone Wars was nearing its end. After Etain returned to Coruscant, she saw that the Jedi Temple was on fire, and resolved to discover exactly what was going on. Not knowing that Order 66 66, and Operation Nightfall had just been initiated. While approaching the temple, she saw a bridge and a group of Padawans attempting to break their way past the checkpoint held by clone troopers of the 501st Legion. The Padawans all clearly distressed. Initially resisting the urge to get involved, Attain eventually reacted to a Jedi trying to kill one of the clones and stepped in front of him, again believing strongly that the Jedi and the clones were one and the same and had the same rights. Every single clone face that she saw the face of Darman. The Padawan's lightsaber cut Attain from shoulder to spine. She died almost instantly, with Attain's death nearly sending Darman into a rage. The child, however, would safely make it back to Mandalore under protection of the Mandalorian that had taken him, while Darman resolved to hate the Jedi even more than Order 66 had called for, believing that the Jedi were in fact traitors. As he saw the Jedi strike down his precious Attain, Cad would be raised as a farmer on Mandalore and a full-blooded Mandalorian. Cad would grow eventually to become a leader of Mandalore, his true past and heritage a complete secret from the Mandalorians around him, as well as the Empire. Darman would eventually be reassigned to the stormtroopers of the 501st Legion, under direct command of Vader, and would continue to serve as a stormtrooper for the remainder of his life, never meeting his son again. This is absolutely one of the most tragic stories we have ever heard about in Star Wars, at least in my opinion, of course. I think that the way Attain dies is so incredibly sad, and I think that this forbidden love very much mirrors the tragedy of Anakin and again Padme, and how their attachment leads to their downfall, mainly because of their respective orders, that being of course the Senate and the Jedi. Maybe not necessarily because their love and relationship itself was toxic, but that was the story of the Jedi that had a child with a clone trooper. What are your thoughts on this? And what are your thoughts on the story of Attain and Darman? As always, my friends, thank you guys so much for watching the channel. May the Force be with you, and have a great day.